It's early morning and you're standing at your kitchen window with a cup of coffee watching a sparrow land on the feeder you filled just yesterday. You smile a little. You feel good about it. You did something kind, right? And somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this quiet thought that settles in. The birds are fine. I'm taking care of them. But what if that feeling, that small, warm certainty, is actually the exact thing keeping you from seeing what's really going on in your own backyard? Here's the thing most people who feed birds never really stop to ask. What does full even mean for a creature that can starve to death in a single night? We just assume more seed means more safety. A busy feeder means a healthy bird. But honestly, the truth living inside your garden right now is a lot stranger than that, and a lot more fragile. These birds aren't just eating, they're racing a clock you can't see, with a body that burns through fuel faster than almost anything else alive. And this is why it matters. A small songbird can lose up to 10% of its body weight in one freezing night just to stay warm enough to make it to dawn. So every little feeding decision you make, what you put in there, when, how often, it isn't just some nice little gesture. It's part of a life or death equation playing out quietly outside your window, every single day, whether you notice it or not. And once you get this, you're not going to look at a full feeder the same way again. Stick with me here, because by the end, you'll see your own backyard a bit differently. And if this kind of hidden world stuff pulls you in, stick around for more, because there's a lot about your everyday world that isn't quite what it looks like. The feeder illusion. Okay, picture the feeder from the bird's point of view for a second. It looks abundant, right? Seeds piled up, glinting in the sun. But a bird doesn't see abundance. It sees a gamble. Every time it lands there, it's exposed. A hawk's shadow, a cat crouched in the hedge, some rival defending its patch. So it doesn't hang around. Grab, swallow, gone. That full feeder you're kind of proud of might only be giving a few seconds of real feeding per visit. Seconds. Repeated dozens of times a day just to break even. You filled it once and walked away. The bird has to keep coming back over and over, and every single return is a risk you never even see. What full actually means to a bird. A chickadee's heart can beat over 1,000 times a minute in the cold. To keep that going, it needs a steady trickle of calories, not one big meal. A non-stop, all-day hunt. Its stomach barely holds anything. No reserve tank, no leftovers saved for later. Which means one overcast day, one storm that keeps it stuck sheltering too long, and the balance tips from fine to gone. When you assume that bird outside is stocked up and safe, you're kind of applying human logic to it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, to a creature living way closer to the edge than almost any mammal you'll ever come across. The empty calorie trap. And here's where good intentions quietly go sideways. Not all seed is equal. Cheap mixes are often loaded with filler, milo, wheat, red millet, stuff most backyard birds barely touch or only eat when they're desperate. Looks like a full feeder, behaves like an empty one. The bird pecks through it, tosses what it doesn't want, and burns energy it didn't have to spare just sorting through food that was never really food for it. So what looked like generosity was, in some cases, closer to a decoy. The seasonal blind spot. And this is the part almost nobody thinks about. The moment birds need the most energy isn't the coldest week of deep winter. It's those sudden temperature crashes in early spring, late fall, when their bodies haven't adjusted yet. Natural food is already thinning out, and a lot of well-meaning people have already stopped refilling because the worst of winter's over. That little gap, that lapse in attention, is exactly when the math turns against them. The water nobody thinks about. And then there's the thing almost every single feeder owner forgets. Food without water isn't a rescue, it's just a countdown. In freezing weather, open water disappears fast, and a bird can actually die of dehydration quicker than starvation. You've been so focused on the seed that the empty bird bath sitting 3 feet away has been working against you the whole time. So put it all together. A feeder that looks abundant but only gives seconds of real nutrition. Seed that looks like food but kind of isn't. A seasonal gap nobody warned you about. A water source nobody refills. On their own, each one feels small, but together, that's a pattern. A slow, invisible starvation happening in plain sight, in gardens exactly like yours, run by people exactly like you, who genuinely believed they were helping. And here's the part that should really stop you. Studies tracking backyard bird populations have actually found declines in species that are heavily fed by humans, not despite the feeding, but tangled up in how that feeding is done. The very thing meant to protect them can, if it's done carelessly, create this false sense of abundance, spread disease at crowded feeders, and mask the real gaps in nutrition and water that decide whether a bird makes it through the night. The feeder isn't the villain here. Your assumptions about what enough looks like, that's the real gap. So go back to that moment at the window. Coffee, the sparrow, that quiet little pride. It's still a good instinct, honestly. But now you know what that bird actually needs. Steady access, real nutrition, and water it can actually reach even when everything outside freezes solid. The silence you never noticed, the feeder you refilled a day too late, the bird bath you forgot about, none of that was cruelty. It was just invisible, and now it isn't anymore. So tell me, when's the last time you actually checked your bird bath in winter? Drop it in the comments. You fill a feeder, a finch lands, eats, flies off. Feels like a small, harmless thing, right? Just you and one little bird. But honestly, that moment doesn't end there. It ripples out into insect populations, into nesting success 3 streets over, into migration patterns that span whole continents, and almost nobody watching from their kitchen window has any idea. Most of us assume feeding birds is just backup, a little extra on top of what nature already gives them. But ecologists who've actually tracked backyard feeding at scale found something weirder than that. It doesn't just supplement nature, it reshapes it, changes which species thrive and which ones quietly disappear, shifts when birds breed, even messes with the insect populations your garden depends on, and it takes years before you'd ever notice. Once you see this chain reaction though, you won't look at a feeder as just birdseed again. Here's why it matters beyond your backyard. Birds aren't just sitting there. They're connective tissue, moving energy from insects to seeds to soil to the next generation of chicks. So when human feeding habits tilt that system, even slightly, the effects don't just stay in your yard. They move through the whole food web, kind of like one domino tipping over 1,000 others. And most of us are triggering that chain without ever realizing our hands on the first piece. If that thought makes you a little uneasy, good, stay with it, because the next part shows you exactly how far it travels, and it's worth knowing before you fill that feeder again. The chain reaction nobody sees. A feeder doesn't just feed the birds that show up, it changes how they behave, where they nest, how far they roam, which territory they'll defend. Birds that would normally spread out across a wide area instead start clustering near the reliable feeders. And that clustering, it concentrates competition, concentrates disease, concentrates predation. One backyard turns into a pressure point that ripples through the whole local population. Way more than a single feeder should ever be able to do. Why seeds aren't enough anymore? Adult birds, sure, they can live on seed. Chicks can't. Nestlings need protein, insects, to actually grow, and there's no substitute for that. Not sunflower seed, not anything. So you can have a well-fed adult population that still fails to raise a single healthy chick because the insects around them are vanishing. Which brings us to the part almost nobody connects to bird feeding at all. The insect collapse connection. Insect numbers have dropped hard in a lot of places over the last few decades. Pesticides, habitat loss, and honestly, our gardens getting too tidy. No leaf litter, no dead wood, no messy corners for bugs to breed in. And here's the kicker. Those tidy gardens are usually the same ones with the nicest feeders, so you might be feeding the adults really well while quietly starving the next generation of the one thing no feeder can replace. Nesting season's hidden deadline. Nesting isn't flexible. A parent bird has this narrow window to raise chicks before they need to survive on their own, and every day without enough protein pushes that deadline closer to failure. A garden can look lush and alive to you, but to a nesting pair, it might be a protein desert full of seed, empty of the one thing that actually decides whether their chicks make it. The migration fuel crisis. Now zoom out even further. Migratory birds rely on a chain of stopover points, each one supposed to offer enough fuel, insects, berries, seed, to get them to the next leg of a trip that can stretch thousands of miles. When backyard habitats shift towards seed-heavy, insect-poor gardens, that chain starts developing weak links. A bird that doesn't refuel enough at one stop shows up at the next one already too depleted to recover. Multiply that across millions of gardens, and you start seeing a pattern in migration data across whole continents. And here's where it really builds. Because this isn't about one careless gardener. It's millions of small, well-meaning choices. Clean lawns, seed-only feeders, no water, no insect habitat, quietly adding up into a global pattern. Researchers looking at long-term bird population trends have found the sharpest declines in exactly the species that depend most on human-modified landscapes. The same landscapes most of us are creating without even knowing it. And here's the reveal that kind of reframes everything. The chain doesn't stop with the birds. Fewer insect-eating birds means insects swing out of control in some areas. Fewer birds spreading seeds means forests regenerate slower. The chain that started at your feeder loops all the way back into the health of the landscape you live in, meaning the ecosystem you thought you were just watching, you were quietly steering it the whole time. So go back to that finch on your feeder. Still just one bird, one moment, but now you know it's also one link in a chain that runs from the insects in your soil to forests 1,000 miles away. The feeder was never just bird seed, it was a lever, and your hand's been on it the whole time. What's one small thing you'd change in your garden after hearing this? Tell me below. Look at your garden this morning. Nothing seems off. Feeder's full, grass is green, sun's coming up over the fence the same way it always does. But somewhere in that ordinary little scene, there's a clue sitting in plain sight, one you've probably walked past 100 times without ever really seeing it. And once you learn to spot it, you'll realize your backyard has been trying to tell you something for months now. Most people hear a quiet garden and think, peaceful, no chaos, no frantic activity, must mean everything's fine, right? But quiet isn't always peace. Sometimes it's absence. And here's the unsettling part. Absence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave a mess. It doesn't make a sound. It just isn't there. Which is exactly why almost nobody notices it happening until it's already well underway. And here's why that matters. A healthy backyard has a rhythm to it. This layered soundscape of calls and flutters and movement that most of us have honestly stopped hearing. It's so constant, we tune it out. But when that rhythm goes quiet, that's not silence, that's a symptom. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly which clues to look for in your own yard. Clues that were sitting there the whole time, just waiting to be read. The clue you walked past every day. Detectives are trained to notice what's missing, not just what's there. Try applying that to your garden for a second. Is there a bird you used to see all the time that you haven't noticed in weeks? Most people can't even answer that, because we remember presence way easier than we remember absence. But that gap, that bird that just stopped showing up, that's often the very first clue that something's shifted. The missing sound, dawn chorus, that first light wave of birdsong, is one of the most reliable signs of a healthy ecosystem there is. And when that chorus starts thinning out, fewer voices, fewer species in the mix, that's a warning sign. It shows up in the sound years before it ever shows up somewhere you can actually see it. Most homeowners never even catch it fading, because it fades slow, like a room getting darker as the sun sets, too gradual to catch in the act. The fake abundance. And this is where the detective work gets interesting. A feeder, packed with the same 2 or 3 species, sparrows, starlings, pigeons, that can look like abundance, like a thriving little hub of activity. But it might actually be masking a decline, because the aggressive, adaptable birds outcompete the more sensitive ones for that easy feeder food. So what looks like a busy backyard is sometimes just a smaller cast of characters playing the same scene on repeat. Who's not showing up anymore? Some species are early warning indicators, basically the canary that leaves the mine before the air actually turns bad. Ground foraging birds, insect specialists, the ones that need dense shrubby cover to feel safe, these are usually the first to quietly vanish from tidied-up feeder-only gardens, long before anything looks visibly wrong to you or me, the timing trap. And here's the clue almost nobody catches. It's not just who's missing, it's when. A garden that goes quiet, specifically in early spring, right when nesting season should be kicking off, that's flashing a very specific signal. Birds that would normally be setting up territory and raising young just, aren't finding what they need to stick around. The timing of the silence is the evidence. So now stack all of it up. A missing species, a thinning chorus, a feeder crowded with nothing but the toughest survivors, a silence that lands at exactly the wrong time of year. On their own, each one's easy to shrug off, but together, they form a case file. And like any good investigation, the pattern only clicks once you stop looking at each clue by itself. And here's the twist that reframes the whole thing. There was no crime scene, no single dramatic moment where the birds just disappeared. It happened the way most real disappearances happen, slowly through 1,000 small absences, until one day you look up and realize the backyard that used to hum with life has gone quiet enough that you finally notice the evidence was never hidden. You just weren't trained to read it. Until now. So look at your garden again. Same one from the start. Feeder full, grass green, sun coming up. Looks identical, but you're not looking at it the same way anymore, are you? You know what to listen for now. You know what absence sounds like. The clues were always there. You just needed to know they were clues at all. So be honest with me. When you think back, is there a bird you used to see that you haven't noticed in a while? Tell me which one down below.